So I think first of all, we'll talk about what non-duality is, just to be clear, like what the difference is between non-duality and therapy. Like sometimes, often people get the two muddled up, so they believe that that therapy is part of non-duality in a way. Like often, so if you're in an organization or if you're in a group, often it's about releasing emotions to get to non-duality, that somebody has to see beyond themselves or see beyond their dynamics to get to non-duality, and it's them that gets to non-duality. But actually, that's not the case. So let's talk about what non-duality is. Non-duality is the realization of who you truly are. It's so hard to talk about. Like I begin and I'm like, how do you even get that into words? So let's talk about what you're not. So most people think that they're a body sitting listening to me talk. This is something I talk about a lot. And that they're sitting on a seat and they're looking out of their eyes and they have a life. They've come from somewhere, they're going to somewhere, and they live on a planet, or they live in a country, they live in a world, on a planet, in a solar system, and they are somebody. And that somebody incorporates all of those things that were talked about. And that's not actually who's experiencing. That is an experience appearing, so there's no need to deny that person. So it is an experience happening, but it's not actually the experiencer. So that's quite fundamental. Like that difference, that the belief that you are somebody, a soul, a separate entity with thoughts, feelings, ideas, ambition, tragedies, traumas, money or no money, poverty or rich, a home, family, that person is experiencing to nobody is experiencing. Nobody, not a thing, is experiencing. So isn't that really cool that you assume that your personality, your soul is looking out of your eyes and that's who's experiencing? Whereas actually there's something beyond that that's looking out. There's something that's the most intimate sense of being that's always been here, but yet there is also been like locked with it this identification with form. So identification with personality, thoughts, feelings, ideas, past, future, possessions. And so your essence, your beingness is so locked in, people call it identified with form, that it's impossible to separate them out. So when I suggest that, it seems like, what? How could there be nobody experiencing now? Of course there's somebody experiencing. It's me, and I'm in here experiencing. And this possibility, this other possibility that it's something else, seems alien to that person. But notice that person that rejects this or likes this, that thought and that idea is appearing. Your choices, your thoughts, your feelings are appearing, and they're being watched, you could say. There's something that's experiencing them. So they're not the experiencer. Like you have an idea that pops up like, I don't know what she's talking about. So that thought pops up and it's like, and there's something that knows that. There's something that's always there that knows these thoughts, these feelings, these ideas. And these thoughts and these feelings, ideas aren't always here looking out. So the idea that you're a rich person isn't always looking out. That can't be who you are. The idea that you're a good person isn't something that's always here. So it can't be who you truly are. It's something that comes and goes, and it's dependent on who you're around. If you're around lots of angels, then maybe you're a bad person. If you're around lots of like murderers, then you're a good person. So it's not a fixed thing. But yet there is this experiencer that's always here, that's absent of any of those qualities. It's so profound, it's absent of any quality. If you were going to give it qualities, you would say it's experiencing, if that is a quality, and love. But that's it. So your thought, your feeling appears. So maybe you've got like an uncomfortable feeling in the heart area, or you've got an uncomfortable feeling in your throat, or you're nervous. So say that's arising, but there's something that experiences it. That nervousness or that heart pain isn't what's experiencing. Most people think that that heart pain or that nervousness is experiencing. So I'm looking out and I am nervous. I have heartache, my heart is broken, and it feels like that's an identity looking out. So that's not who's looking out now. This identity, this belief system, these thoughts, these feelings, these ideas. And it's so indoctrinated, this idea of you. Like it's such a fundamental belief. You even believe that you're somebody that came from the past and is sitting here. And that's a thought and an image that arises. But how could that be who's experiencing now? So thought and images arises of someone coming from the past and sitting here, and then there's an identification with that, and then this constant belief that you're somebody that's moving through time. Whereas actually who you are is the timeless, this moment that's experiencing itself, life that's experiencing itself. That's who you've always been, and that's what you'll be after death as well. But what happens is it's my consciousness, it's my feelings, it's my ideas, it's my life. And there's a constant story of your life. Like, I'm living here, I'm going there, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I look like this, I look like that. And with it, there's more than likely an image of yourself doing it in your head. But notice in that, there's something that experiences it. So therefore, that person you believe yourself to be, that you're always telling yourself you are, cannot be the experiencer. It's an experience. Isn't that magical? Isn't that really profound? Like who you believe yourself to be isn't you. It's an experience that comes and goes. And it comes with this body. This body has an identity. So somebody calls its name Lisa and it's like, yes, that's me. So the body has an identity, it has a personality, it has a character, it has likes, it has dislikes, it has memories, it has friends. There's all these different things. But that isn't the experiencer. That's a functioning of the body that's appearing in this. Actually, the experiencer is no thing appearing as everything. You could say consciousness because most people call it consciousness in non-duality. But in the end, it's actually deeper than consciousness. It's deeper than looking. Like in the end, it comes down to mystery. It's unknowing of your essence. But that looking and that consciousness and that sense of being is most probably the most accurate way in which we can describe it, because it's what's always here. And when describing it, the looking, the experiencer, there is no difference between the experiencer and that which is experienced. So it's a very good way in order to communicate it. But actually it goes deeper than looking and beingness. It's absolute mystery. You don't know who you are, but yet you are. Like even limiting it to an idea of consciousness is an idea. In the end, maybe the best ways to describe it is no thing appearing as everything, or something that cannot be known, but yet it is. It knows itself. It is itself. So now maybe you're thinking about a choice that you've got to make, or a decision you've got to make. So in that, there is thoughts happening and there's feelings appearing. So there is like decision whether to go on holiday this year or not, as we're in the summertime in lots of the world, or in half of the world. So there's a thinking about whether or not to go on holiday. So there's a weighing up of the options. So let's look at what happens. So a thought comes up that says, where should I go on holiday this year? And then another thought says, let's look up the best places to go on holiday. Let's see what the internet says is the top 10 places, which I discovered recently was France. France is the #1 holiday destination of the world. I'd have thought it had been somewhere in Asia or the Caribbean or something. So there's a thought that comes up and says, yes, let it be France that we go on holiday to. And another thought is like, yeah, but it's too expensive. Another thought's like, can I afford it this year? If I stay at home, then I'll be better off. And what about the pollution? Yeah, but I need a break. I need to meet other people. I need to do other things. I'm going to get bored. It's my only opportunity. What if I die this year? So all these ideas happen, and these thoughts happen. And there's nothing wrong with those thoughts in their infancy. They get out of control, but in the infancy, there's nothing wrong with the thoughts around choice. The reason that I presume that we have this conscious choice making is so that it can update our unconscious and our unconscious decision making. So on the conscious level, we inform ourselves about choices. So we look into it and we take in all the consideration, the air pollution, the travel, the time of the travel, how much it will cost. We take in all of this information, and then it updates and informs, I presume, the unconscious mechanisms that are happening. There's so much unconscious that's happening. We wouldn't ever possibly be able to be conscious of it. So it's, in a way, you can say, like putting information into the robot. It's not, you think that you're putting in the information, you're going to make the choice. Actually, scientists are beginning to find out, or have found out, or have proven that what happens when we make a choice is a choice is made, and then 6 seconds after the choice is made, another thought pops in claiming that choice. So the body makes a choice, there's no consciousness of it, and then a conscious thought comes in, claiming that I am going to choose red ice cream, strawberry ice cream, and then you think it's your choice and you're like, oh man, I made the wrong choice, but actually it's happened. And all of that decision making, like how much sugar it has, how much this it has, how much that it has, your health, your weight, all of that is updating this unconscious mind that then makes a choice. So actually it's a body-mind mechanism that's making choices, but it's not yours on the conscious level. So even if you look at it scientifically and logically, you begin to see, oh yeah, there really isn't somebody in here making a choice. We're like on automatic, we're robots, we're an organism, just like everything else in this planet. It's an organism that's happening, but we're obsessed with this idea of choice. But this idea of choice helps us. It helps us give the appearance of free will, which is important for us to go out and navigate and explore this world, that we have the appearance of it. And it also stops us feeling like we're in a cage, trapped. It makes us feel free. It gives us the feeling of freedom that we appear to choose. But there's not actually somebody's choice. If you had the feeling that you can't choose anything, it would actually be a bad thing for the human. But that we have this feeling of choice, but when you look at it, there's not actually somebody's choice happening. There's nobody there that chooses. So this storyteller that's appearing, so this like more conscious mind, or some people call it the ego, appears and claims all these things. And then there's an identification that happens with this consciousness and beingness. On the ultimate level, beingness can't be identified. But on the relative level, it appears to be. So it's almost like that person becomes conscious. It feels like that person is conscious, and that person is somewhere in here, and it is conscious. Like you could, in some ways, it's like you could kill the body and you imagine that consciousness, like a soul, comes out of the body and then it goes into another body or something. This is what a lot of people believe, or it goes up to heaven. So that they're so convinced by this idea that personality, that ego, that conscious mind activity and consciousness are one and the same thing. Whereas actually there is consciousness, there is experiencing happening, and in experiencing there is this personality struggle that has thoughts and ideas. When they do this, when there is the identification, this is what I call suffering, and what I suspect the Buddha called suffering as well, and lots of other spiritual teachers call suffering. And this identification creates obsessive thinking and compulsive thinking about yourself, because you really believe that you are the whole entire universe, you as an ego, you as a mind mechanism. And then that creates rapid thinking about yourself. And rather than choices just being what they are, choices that have to be made, they become so important because they're your choices and you own the choices. And if you don't choose correctly, then you are guilty and responsible, and you fucked up your life, and your happiness is dependent on it. Your future happiness is dependent on the choices that you make here now, and it's super important. And this actually sends the ego, or the thinking mind, crazy, because the mind been given too much responsibility. It's like, and it grows over time. So the more that belief is invested in, the more that thinking and craziness grows, and it sends the body-mind out of sync. It sends all the chakras and the system a bit bonkers. And this is suffering, this constant looking into time and believing that you're a time-bound entity, which isn't true. It can't be true. Like if you look at the identity of who you think yourself to be, you realize that it only happens in time. But time is a human creation. It's not an actual fact. Something we've labeled as a movement from one moment to the next moment. We've labeled it something called time, just like we've labeled this thing called space, that there is space between me and you. We created all those words. What was it like prior to that? So if we look back to our ancestors, the chimpanzee, so we've got these two animals that we suspect came from each other. So we suspect that the human evolved from the chimpanzee. I can't guarantee that that's the way it is, but that's what scientists say, and there's a good chance they're right. So that we've evolved from a chimpanzee. Now, the chimpanzee lived up in the tree, and the human descended from the tree and went onto the plains, went into the Sahara, they suspect, somewhere in Africa most probably. But they went down from the trees and they went onto the plains, they went onto the land. The chimpanzees, they have the ability to imagine, but they don't have complex language or complex instructions. They can do certain things, so they have a certain level of intelligence higher than a lot of other animals, and they have self-awareness as well, but they don't really have a language like we do, and they don't have that greater skills at the perception of time and the ability to use time to help their survival. To them, their strength and their capabilities in the tree is enough for their survival. But when the humans came down from the trees, the humans needed to fix a lot more obstacles, because the humans weren't so strong on the ground. Like the up in the trees, the chimpanzees were very strong. They had a lot of force. They had a lot of dominance. They were in big packs, and they could go from trees to tree, and they had strong ability to survive. But when they started going down and walking on the ground, there wasn't so much protection. So when they went away from the trees, they didn't have the ability of height, the ability of that strength to go through the trees and protect themselves from wild animals. So what they had to do was they had to develop their problem-solving skills, which chimpanzees had to an extent. You see chimpanzees opening things and using tools to some extent, but the humans had to develop them a lot more in order to survive. So they had to begin to think about things like time and how to do things in time. Like they had to strategically plan to kill their animal, rather than the chimpanzees would plan it to an extent, but very limited, in a very limited way. Like they ate the fruits, and they ate from the trees, but also the way that they ambushed animals in the trees, and their physical strength didn't mean planning, whereas humans had to beat all these huge ground animals like ligers, tigers, and I don't know what other types of animals, and they used strategies. So what this did was it developed a part of our brain which began to imagine past and future stronger, so in a stronger way. And they began to have to use language in order to communicate to each other about catching the animal or protecting themselves from an animal. And they had to build things. They had to, when they were sleeping at night, they had to build something around them in order to protect themselves. So they developed this complex thinking that chimpanzees didn't have. Chimpanzees had a micro level of it, but not much. So the chimpanzee's experience is the chimpanzee is present. Another thing about chimpanzee is a chimpanzee has a fantastic memory. So it can memorize things. So if you show it a screen, it can memorize things really quickly, whereas the human didn't develop that skill because it didn't need it. Whereas the chimpanzee needs very quick memory when it's foraging, when it's hunting, and when it's moving around the trees and the places that it jumps to. Like that creates a very strong memory. But short-term memory, whereas the humans develop their long-term memory. So the chimpanzees were predominantly living in the moment. They didn't have the ability to leave the moment with their thinking. So they were predominantly focused on what was actually happening, the grabbing of the branches, the swinging between the trees, the hunting, the being in groups, the dominance and hierarchy amongst the group, the foraging for fruit. Whereas the humans began to stray away from that and began to think. So who were the humans before they thought? They were just beingness. They were just looking out like the monkeys were, like the chimpanzees were, just experiencing this world. But then the humans, through time, as they began to name more things and get more involved with language, they began to identify with that language, and they began to believe they are language, that I am a name. The chimpanzee doesn't think I am a name. It responds to a name if it keeps getting food when it's given a name, but it doesn't identify and think I am, and have this imagination in the head, peer, of like its image, and think I am Susan. It just simply is. It's experiencing and has very limited long-term memory skills. But the human identifies with this language and then begins to believe it is somebody in time. And this is the beginning of the suffering of the human. If you look at chimpanzees, they don't suffer. They experience pain and pleasure. So being a caged chimpanzee that's being tested on for makeup is a very painful experience, but it doesn't suffer because it can't imagine that it's having that experience. It's just there. It's just experiencing with pain or pleasure. Whereas the human begins to suffer because it begins to imagine itself suffering, and it begins to imagine all the potential suffering it can have and all the past suffering it has. And then it identifies with this and it holds this constant story running of itself. And this is suffering. And this is what all other animals don't have. And I'm absolutely convinced about this. I don't have any scientific proof for it that animals don't suffer, but I'm absolutely convinced from my own experiences that animals do not suffer because they haven't got complex language. And the reason that we began to suffer was that we got complex language, or we evolved this complex language, and then we identified with it that I am somebody here and you are there. Whereas the chimpanzee is not like that. It's just as it is. It's just experiencing. It's free. You can see that I've been watching chimpanzees on YouTube. The fascination. I love animals. I do enjoy it. And the identification with being something that's moving in time. Time isn't your essence. It can't be your essence. We made it up. It doesn't exist in the chimpanzee world. Your essence is that which is present, which is here, which is now, which is looking out. And in that is forming a story. And the identification is the problem. So now we've cleared up what non-duality is. Let's go to therapy. So why talk therapy is limited? Because in talk therapy, you're always circling in yourself. So I think it's great to get a better self, to have a more healthy self. And sometimes I wonder and I think that if you don't have a certain regulated, healthy self, then it's impossible to listen to non-duality. But that's unknown. Again, there's been no scientific experiments on that, and I don't know if that's true, but it seems like if somebody's deeply suffering with their personal self, with their life choices, with their situation, with their thoughts, with their ideas, with their belief systems, and they're constantly putting themselves in danger, that suffering, it could split someone open, but more than likely what it does is it just makes their suffering more and more tense as the years go on, and they shut down more and more to life. So balancing the person, I think to an extent is great. So looking at your childhood experiences, looking at the belief systems that these bodies have, looking at what you're telling yourself on a daily experience. Oops. I think all of that is great. Oops. Sorry, just put this up. So I think doing that is a great thing. Understanding why you think things, seeing the pattern in it, seeing how impersonal it is that your thoughts and your behaviors are similar to your parents and you're acting out in different ways, and being logical about it, and understanding the correlation between the thinking mind and the body. A lot of talk therapies don't do that, but some do. Some practitioners do a lot more energetic work, but correlating, like when you have a feeling in your body, to the thought, because in the end I think the body tells the truth, whereas the thoughts lie. So knowing what your body is actually saying and what feelings you have in your body is super important to understanding the structures and the beliefs and the thoughts of the personal self. But that is like a circle. That's never going to end. And what most people believe in enlightenment circles is that that person in that circle who's been for therapy, who's worked on themselves, who lives in time, is going to become enlightened and is going to become free and is going to have the non-dual realization. But that I, that sense of that person, is what separates you from the world. So identification with that person, that belief that that's who you are, is what separates you from everything. That original I and the world, the original I am a body and this is the world that I'm in relationship to, which is a belief system, but that is what separates you from everything. So that belief that that person is going to free itself, either in therapy and be a happy person, either in therapy or in enlightenment, is a redundant belief system, because who is going to wake up? So if you think back to the chimpanzee has no problem with its conditioning. Its conditioning didn't get very, its conditioning didn't create very complicated thinking, which created lots of suffering and pain. So it just is conditioned. It might be a grumpy gorilla or a grumpy chimpanzee or a violent chimpanzee or a sweet chimpanzee or an empathetic chimpanzee. But that chimpanzee is free because it's not identified with being that chimpanzee. So even though it's got all types of behaviors, which could be violent, sweet, nice, kind, happy, sad, angry, whatever it is. And so the human believes that it's going to wake up, that I am going to wake up as a person, or I'm going to free myself through talk therapy. So even if you're not into non-duality, like people that are into talk therapy, they have a belief that they will become happy by doing this talk therapy, that there is an endpoint where they uncondition themselves enough, which is impossible. The body-mind mechanism is always going to be conditioned, and the real suffering is the merging together of these two dynamics, that you are the experiencer. Put simply in like non-dual, in Buddhist language, it would be that you've got to be in the moment, but just without you. So it's this recognition that you are the moment, because you is already out of the moment. You is already labeled too much. So it's that recognition, and it's an energetic shift. It's not you that has that shift, because you don't exist. All these ideas about yourself and this image about yourself isn't actually a real person. Who exists is what's looking out now. And you begin to see where words get tricky, because who could have that awakening? Nobody. It's no one's awakening. It's very humble. It's life's awakening. It's this moment's awakening. So nobody ever becomes enlightened. So when people say they are enlightened, people say I'm enlightened, and I really don't like that. On the personality structure level, Lisa doesn't like it, because she doesn't want that responsibility, she doesn't want that title, and she doesn't want to have to live up to that in any way. She just wants to be herself on the personality structure, which certainly isn't enlightened. It's as it is in every moment. There's some good parts to her, and some parts that we can work on, and we can help evolve. But that character, so the thinking, the thoughts and the ideas do not want to be enlightened in my body. It's not a goal of mine. But there is something else here that's experiencing, that is free. And that's who you really are. And that's the shift. But some people claim they are enlightened. I don't know why they do that. It could be just because, this stuff is so impossible to talk about, but it also could be a misunderstanding, like they've had some energetic shifts and then they've miscategorized it with the person waking up. Like in the beginning, I thought, like, because it was so radical, this shift for me, like for most people it's gentle, but for me, I had lots of little shifts and then a big shift, like when this was seen. And so even when I'm saying that for me, it sounds like it happened to me, but it didn't happen to me, but just for the story's sake. But I remember in the beginning, like the character was impressed by some dynamics that had fallen down, and then it associated that with waking up, which, it was an effect of waking up, but it's in my particular case, but it's not a determiner for waking up, and it's not going to happen in other people. It was just what happened here, that some particular dynamics which were bothersome to me fell away or became reduced. But then, pushed enough, they came back a little bit at certain points. When people behaved in a certain way, there was like, ah. It was my temper predominantly that I was impressed fell away. And it's like my temper, I used to have like get angry not that regularly, like once or twice a month, like big anger, like blame would come up and nastiness. Whereas that fell away a lot, but I still get it. I still, not like I did, but I still get angry with people, behaviors, or my behaviors or life. Still get angry. Can be frustrating, this experience sometimes. So on both sides, you could say that like non-duality taught without reconditioning, I would be skeptical of. I used to teach non-duality without really reconditioning, and I realized that there was beauty in that, just having pure non-duality. But I also realized that it was disastrous for some people. There was only a very small percentage of people that were ready for it. And as a speaker, how do you determine that? Like if you're speaking publicly, but because it's a disaster if the personality structure tries to heal itself through non-duality. So the personality structure tries to give itself therapy through non-duality. It's good for the personality structure if it does this practice of moving back to the I am and stuff. Like, so if it's too identified, moving back to the I am, but doing that all the time is a spiritual bypass and repression. You do need to look at other dynamics of the personality, but it can be helpful. It's like a pattern to stop the mind like spinning off into all types of dramas. But you know, telling yourself there is nobody when you're having an argument or when you're trying to make a life decision is hopeless. I know that people are telling themselves that to relax it, but I think that you should be looking at what the dynamic is in the body rather than trying to relax it. When I was communicating the pure non-duality in the beginning, though, I was just communicating out of love, and it wasn't about how people responded to it. It was just love that wanted to come out and be expressed, which is super beautiful. But then as I worked with people and as an empath, I realized that, you know, saying that to certain people just wasn't productive for them. And then also I had these experiences in life where I got my ass whipped, and it broke something. It changed something, and something else was opened up. And I feel like now as a speaker, it's more balanced, and I feel very happy with that balance, that I'm happy to work with people inside the dream and inside their issues, but then making it very clear that that person doesn't wake up and that who you truly are is beyond that. And that the person can go between two. It can listen to the non-duality when it feels like it, and then it can listen to more of the personal stuff when it feels like it.